wonderful story of love. Tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love. With the immortal strain, angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love. 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 Though you are far away, wonderful story of love. Still he doth call today, calling from Calvary's mountain, down from the crystal bright fountain, e'en from the dawn of creation. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love. Wonderful story of love.
We're going to start in verse 20, and the paragraph roughly is 20 to 23 as we are introduced. And at the very end of class last week, I mentioned Gabriel. We're going to be introduced to Gabriel again. We actually were first introduced to him in the previous chapter, but we're going to be introduced to him. He's going to come into the picture again. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my plea before the Lord my God for the holy hill of my God, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the first, came to me in swift flight at the time of the evening sacrifice. He made me understand, speaking with me and saying, "O Daniel, I have now come out to give you insight and understanding. At the beginning of your pleas for mercy, a word went out, and I have come to tell it to you. For you are greatly loved. Therefore consider the word and understand the vision." So Gabriel arrives to explain some things to Daniel. A little background. I mentioned at the end of the class last week that this is the first named angel in Scripture. At least I believe that was the case at the time. I have since confirmed that that is the case. This is the first named angel. His name means God is my strength. That's what Gabriel translates to. He appears by name only at two places in the Bible that I'm aware of, and these are both major moments in God's redemptive plan. He appears here in Daniel chapter 8 and 9, and he appears in Luke chapter 1 in connection with the birth of John the Baptist and the birth of Christ, or the announcement of those births. His presence seems to mark decisive movements in God's redemptive work. That's when he is sent. His only, let me ask it this way. Based on what I just read here in this verse, where it says, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, how do we know he's an angel and not a man? Okay, the very next verse mentions the fact that he flew swiftly. Now, whether that's literal flight is another question, but that's not the descriptive of how a person arrives, that is in the physical world. But also notice back in chapter 8 when he is introduced at the beginning of the vision, that's verses 15 and 16. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And so it says the man in this text based upon his form, based upon his appearance, not upon his nature. He clearly is angelic, and as he's introduced in Luke 1, that's even more clear. So I think it's worthy of noting that, so that make sure there's nobody that's confused. The purpose of his arrival, to reveal the prophetic meaning of the vision, and to give actually a little more information we're going to find out as the chapter goes on about the 70 weeks. And that is actually explaining some things to Daniel, explaining some things about even some of the prophecy that generated this whole event. So Daniel's reading in the scriptures, he reads the prophets, he's moved by what he reads, and he responds by putting on sackcloth and ashes and offering his petitions to God. God immediately sends Gabriel to communicate to him and make some things more clear to him. That's what this is saying. While I was speaking and praying, Gabriel comes and says, I'm here to give you insight and understanding. And those two words are different. We'll look at the last one first. To give you understanding, that means what? Yeah. Can you know about something without understanding it? How many of you know that airplanes can fly? How many of you understand how airplanes fly? How many of you understand how airplanes can fly well enough that you would feel comfortable explaining to someone else who's going to become a pilot how airplanes fly? You see, level of understanding matters. There is a difference. How many of you know of music? Know about music? How many of you enjoy music? How many of you think that you know a lot about music? How many of you want to explain the theory behind music? We got one guy in the room. And a couple more who'll go, yeah, I'll do it to a point. And then I'll say, that's really all I can do. You need to go talk to somebody else. Because, I've got 8 hours or something of music theory, and that just don't get you very far. It gets you a whole lot further than not having that, but it don't get you very far. That is understanding. Daniel had knowledge of what he read. Gabriel sent to make sure that he understands what he read. Now, the first thing that's mentioned here is to give you insight. What is insight? Okay, it's set apart here as something distinct. So there's a nuance different to insight. What's the root of the word insight? Sight. What is sight? To see something. So insight has to do with being able to see. And it implies giving vision, and then understanding implies grasping. So I'm going to make you aware of some things, and I'm going to help you grasp these things. I'm going to help you see something, and I'm going to help you grasp it. Where is Daniel's mind? I'm going to stop right here. Where is Daniel's mind right now? He is thinking about God. There's no doubt about that. He is in prayer to God. He is actively in prayer to God. But what is he praying about? Physical things, the 70 years of captivity, and the actually going back to Jerusalem, and the reestablishment of the nation of Israel in the promised land. That's what he's thinking about. We're going to find out that God has much more that's going on here. And that the things that Daniel is focusing on is merely the surface of what God is doing. So that's the point of what moves forward in this chapter. Before we get into verses 24 through 27, I'll just point out again, God hears and responds to prayers. That's one of the things that we can take away from this. While I was speaking and praying, God sent a messenger to inform me of some things. But God responds in ways that may include things that we're not even thinking about. And that's what's going to become very clear as Gabriel makes him aware, gives him insight about these things. So let's read verses 24 through 27. 70 weeks are decreed about your people in your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Okay, what's Daniel thinking about? He's read in Jeremiah and determines that the captivity is to last how long? 70 years. He's thinking 70 years, and the message from Gabriel is 70 weeks. Okay, so that's the first clue that there's something more going on. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that 70 weeks phrase in a moment. There's some translation questions as to how maybe we should translate that, and we'll make note of that in a moment. But don't get caught up in that. Just listen to what he says. 70 weeks to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin. That's kind of absolute language, isn't it? To atone for iniquity. When was the atonement for iniquity going to take place? At the death of Christ. So keep that in mind. That's important to start picking up these things that he's talking about. The end of sin, the atonement for iniquity, everlasting righteousness. When's that going to come? In the time of Christ. To seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Now, there was already a most holy place on the earth, right? In the temple in Jerusalem. But there's going to be another one that's anointed. And again, I would say this is pointing forward to what is accomplished through Christ. When he enters in, not into the tabernacle made with hands, but into heaven itself. And he goes there, according to John 14, to do what? To prepare a place for you. So everything that this angel is talking about is shifting Daniel's thoughts away from the immediate context of going back to Jerusalem to something much grander that God is at work doing. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and a moat, but in a troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Now, who's the desolator? Yeah, think about that. These are questions we need to be asking ourselves. What is he talking about? He's telling us this so that we know and understand some things. So what are we supposed to know and understand? Well, the first thing we want to talk about is the purpose of these 70 weeks. We're told at the very beginning what the purpose of these 70 weeks are. First, to finish transgression and sin. God is going to address the sin problem. To atone for iniquity. God is going to give a real atonement. Not this annual remembrance of the atonement that happens year after year after year, but an actual atonement. To bring everlasting righteousness. To seal the vision in the prophecy, which means what? When the prophet goes and finds the house of God laying desolate, but he says, while you live in your sealed houses, what does he say? Yeah, they had finished the work on their houses. They had not done anything on the temple. The temple continued to lay in desolation while they had rebuilt their houses. And they kind of had things backwards. They should have started with rebuilding the house of God. And then they could worry about the other things. When it says to seal the visions and the prophecy, it means to bring them to fruition, to complete them. What did Jesus do? He came to fulfill the prophecies. To anoint the most holy place. How was the holy place anointed? We just read about it. Literally just read about it in Exodus. In our study in Exodus on Wednesdays. Not Exodus, we're in Leviticus now. In our study in Leviticus. How did they anoint the tabernacle? What was the first thing he did? He sprinkled blood on it. How did Christ anoint the most holy place? He brought his blood into heaven itself as an atonement for our sins. Not the blood of bulls and goats, but his own blood. So all of these things are clearly more comprehensive than what Daniel is thinking when he begins his prayer. And God is like, look, you're talking about going back to Jerusalem. I'm dealing with going to heaven. You're talking about rebuilding a temple that one day is going to be destroyed. And I'm talking about something that will never be destroyed. You're focused on the blood of bulls and goats. And I'm talking about a sacrifice much greater. He's shifting the vision and explaining that there's something much bigger going on. The 70 weeks are, I think, clearly symbolic weeks. The Hebrew word translated weeks literally means sevens. And so the text itself can be 7 sevens. Now, what's the significance of 7? Right. The idea of, you got the 7 churches of Asia, you've got 7 days in a week, you've got, anytime that symbolic number 7 is used, is to say that when you multiply by 7s, you're just stressing completeness. So he's like, look, the completion of things doesn't come at the end of 70 years. The completion of things comes at the end of 77s. When things are really done. And he's not talking about 490 weeks either, I don't believe, or 490 years for that matter. There are a lot of people who believe that these are symbolics for days, that these are symbolic for years. It's just completeness. The timeline concerns Israel and Jerusalem because Gabriel says it is about your people in your holy city. But the holy city ultimately is not the one built on earth by men. The holy city ultimately is what? The New Jerusalem, that's built not by human hands, that they've been looking for how long? Well, the Hebrew writer tells us Abraham has been looking for it since the promise was made to him. He was looking for the city whose builder is God. And so that's ultimately what we are talking about here. The goals concern sin, righteousness, and completion of the prophetic revelation, the fulfillment of those things. There are 3 segments. There are 7 sevens, there are 62 sevens, and there is 1 7. And I want you to notice that the key events, according to verse 26, all occur after the 62. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And what does that sound like? Okay, who's the anointed one? Christ. That is in fact what the word Christ means. Okay, and he shall be cut off and have nothing. When was he cut off? He died. The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war, desolations are decreed. What happened to this Jerusalem that Daniel was all worried about? Well, at the end of this time period, when Christ came, it was destroyed, done away with. It is no more. And it never will be again. Despite the fact that in 1946, a nation came into existence that calls itself Israel and that possesses part of the territory. Is there a temple? Is there a high priest? Yeah, but not their high priest, not a Jewish high priest. What do we have? The true high priest. Where's he? He's in heaven. In the temple made without hands. These things all come after the 62 sevens or 62 weeks. So we know that at least 69 of these 70 weeks all came to fruition around the events of the appearance of Christ in his time on the earth. Then you have 1 7 left. 1 period. 1 complete period. Daniel prayed because he understood Jeremiah's prophecy about 70 years of desolation. God reveals something much bigger than just Jerusalem not being in desolation anymore. It's more than about the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. It's about the divine plan regarding sin and righteousness and the fulfillment of the prophecies of God. And Jerusalem's ultimate city, which is the New Jerusalem, which came down from where? From heaven. Wasn't built by men. Very different city than what men think about as well. Is it a literal city on a literal place in the earth? No. The kingdom of God is in your midst, is what Jesus would say about it. You can't say, look, here it is, or lo, there it is. It's within us. So the 77's not really about a time frame, not really about, it's about a completion of God's time frame. And it's divided into segments, and we can see and understand through continued reading. We can learn the same way Daniel learned about the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, by reading and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is what Daniel was talking about. This is what Gabriel explained to Daniel. This is the same language here. These are the same events being described. This has happened. This has happened. What's left to happen, by the way? Listen to the last sentence of this chapter. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. The last enemy to be defeated is death. Satan, in his lies that brings about death, because death is what? What's it the result of? Sin. The sting of sin is death. The lies of Satan, he's the desolator. And death that comes with those lies will be ultimately destroyed. And that is the end. That's what's left to be done. And what's going to happen to those? What's going to happen to sin and death? They're going to be cast into the lake of fire with the devil and his angels. That's what's going to happen to them. Which is, according to the book of Revelation, the second death. And again, I'll point this out. I've been pointing this out all along while we studied this. Daniel and Revelation work together. If you want to understand one, consider the other. And draw from both. A ruler is going to arise and bring destruction. The final week is going to be associated with that being put down. The anointed one clearly is the Messiah. So we know that we are in the final week, the final 7. Because all that stuff started with the appearance of the anointed one. Which also tells me what else? If we're in the last week, what else does that mean? There's not anything coming later. So the idea of this millennial reign and the setting up of the physical kingdom in Jerusalem is a misunderstanding of the promise of God. And that's exactly what Gabriel is trying to do for Daniel. And say, no, you're focusing on the wrong thing. There's something much grander that's taking place. And you need to be focused on that. Abraham was focused on that. Daniel could focus on that, and so can we. Despite their exile and their persecution and any apparent delay that he might have felt. What could he know? Well, that God fulfills his promises and he would do exactly what he said he would do. That also tells us that behind Jeremiah's prophecy and behind the promise of the 70 years and then the restoration, that was only a small cog in a bigger process that was much more important. Christians today can trust in God's ultimate plan of salvation through Christ, who is bringing to the world everlasting righteousness. who is bringing to the world complete atonement, who is bringing to the world an end of sin and death. You remember that's where he started. He said to bring or to finish transgression, to put an end to sin. Then he said to atone. Then he said to bring everlasting righteousness and to complete both vision and prophet and to anoint a most holy place. I go and prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. These things are being done exactly as they were promised. God's sovereignty over history was always to do what? Why did he deal in the affairs of men? That's what we learned back in chapter, 7, I think it was, of Daniel. So that God is engaged in the affairs of men. Why is he engaged in the affairs of men? He is working to rectify the sin problem and the division that occurs between us and God because of sin. He is working to atone for our sin so that we can have fellowship with him. And again, to draw back in the study that we're doing on Wednesday nights in Leviticus, what's the purpose of the book of Leviticus? It's answering the question, how can man have fellowship with God? And right in the center of that discussion is chapter 16 of Leviticus, which is all about what? Atonement. That is what he is doing. God involved himself in what's going on the earth only in as much as is necessary to do what? To accomplish his will and purposes on the earth. And that, by the way, is ultimately what is meant by God causes all things to work together for the good of those who believe. It's about salvation. It's about more than here and now. It's about more than your body. It's about your soul. It's about more than your illness. It's about your spiritual death. It's about more than your discomfort here. It's to rescue you from the ultimate discomfort, which is portrayed as what? Hellfire. The rich man looked up in torment. He didn't rescue them from the fire pit. He didn't rescue them from the lion's den. They went into those places. But he's trying to keep us out of the second death. That's actually what he's doing. There's a messianic expectation, and there's this enduring hope that remains because of these things. No matter what happens when you go back to Jerusalem, you're going to go back to Jerusalem, Daniel is told, but no matter what happens when you go back to Jerusalem, whether it meets your expectations or it doesn't meet your expectations, has nothing to do with what I am ultimately doing for you. It is only so that I can send the anointed one. That is why Israel was preserved, so that Jesus could come into the world. Once Jesus came into the world, was there any need for Israel? No. So what happened to them? They were destroyed. All right, got to stop. Lord willing, we will get into chapter 10 next week.
Wonderful story of love, tell it to me again. Wonderful story of love, with the immortal strain. Angels with rapture announce it, shepherds with wonder receive it. Sinner, oh, won't you believe it? Wonderful story of love.